Well, thank you very much for coming. We are among friends, which is always wonderful. I thank you very much. And it means a lot that you are here for the book presentations of Randall, Wray, and mine. I'm Carlos García from Lola Books, author of Fiat Socialism. It will not take me long because, of course, the most important thing is that we have with us Randall Wray, one of the fathers, or the main father of modern monetary theory, who will introduce today his last book in German, Geld für Anfänger. Money for beginners. In English, we have it in German, Geld für Anfänger. It's the second book that we published of Randall Wray. The first one was Modernes Gelfersten, that we published a couple of years ago. I think it was the first book of modern monetary theory ever translated. And of course, he's a good friend of the publishing house of Lola Books. We met in 2015 with his premiere. And for me, it's a real honor to be here with him, such a wonderful figure. So it will not take me long. I just want to introduce the other book today, which is Fiat Socialism, Achieving the Goals of Socialism Through Modern Monetary Theory, which is this one. The book is divided in three parts. The first one is an introduction, the goals of socialism and modern monetary theory. Chapter 4 is dedicated to Kalecki, profit equation. The fifth is a particular case in which I talk about Spain. Then I talk about the conclusions of the book, and the third one is called Euro delendus est. It's a selection of articles that I have been writing over the years because the idea of fiat socialism has been developed through a lot of articles, and I think they are very useful to understand the concept of fiat socialism. And almost every article I finish with the words Euro delendus est. It's a paraphrasis of Cato the Elder, who was a senator in Rome, and he always used to finish every speech in the Senate saying, Cartago delenda est. We have to destroy, or Cartago has to be destroyed. In the case of fiat socialism, it's the euro, the one that I propose to destroy. So, euro delendus est. The euro must be destroyed. So the first thing I want to talk about is the definition of fiat socialism. The definition is fiat socialism is the achievement of the goals of socialism through modern monetary theory. So here we have two factors that are of main importance. First of all, the goals of socialism, and then modern monetary theory. So from this definition, I start talking about the goals of socialism. What are the goals of socialism? And after that, I talk about modern monetary theory. What is modern monetary theory? So this is what fiat socialism is. The appliance of, the achievement of the goals of socialism through modern monetary theory. How can we achieve the goals of socialism through modern monetary theory? In order to divide the book, in order to give a structure to the book, I talk about Kant, and I quote Stefan Dietrich when he says that Kant is not the solution, but there is no solution without Kant. And I talk about the schema, or the schema of Kant in his works, where he always had a reference, a general principle, a rule, and a case. So I take this schema, and I also have a reference, which is the goals of socialism. This is where we start. Kant starts from the goals. The goals are not here. The goals are at the beginning. We start from the goals. That is one of the main characteristics that differentiates Kant from other thinkers, for example, Hegel. So the goals are at the beginning. Yeah? The first stages are the goals. The goals are not the consequence of a historic law or a historic process which we have to go through until we arrive our objectives. The goals are at the beginning. The first chapter is about the goals of socialism. Then we have a general principle. The general principle is modern monetary theory that I use as a method to achieve full employment without inflation. Then we have a rule how we can condense modern monetary theory into a practical rule, which in this case is Kalecki's profit equation. And then we have a case, which is the macroeconomic policies of the state. In the case of the book, I talk about Spain, but this should be different for every country. So if we were talking about Germany, then we could talk about the macroeconomic policies of the state of Germany, etc. So the case will be different in every case. So what are the goals of socialism? In order to explain what the goals of socialism are, I talk about Stuart Chase. Stuart Chase was an American economist who in 1942 wrote a book called The Road We Are Traveling. And there he explains the 5 goals of every rational government. What every rational government should aim to achieve. And then he talks about full employment, full and prudent use of material resources, guarantee of 5 essentials to every citizen: food, housing, clothing, health services, and education, social securities in the form of benefits for the sick, accident, temporary unemployment, and labor standards that are in the form of minimum wages, maximum hours, etc. So what Stuart Chase identifies as the goals of every rational government, I identify as the goals of socialism. And I say that every society that achieves these 5 things for everybody in a universal manner and for free, I mean, without imposing any debt to the citizens, can be called socialist. As you can see in this schema, I don't talk about the ownership of the production of means. I will talk about that later, and I will say that the size of the private sector should be decided democratically. What do we want that the government does, and what do we want that the private government does? But that comes afterwards. Through the definition, we can say that any society that guarantees these 5 essentials to every citizen without making the citizens go into debt can be called socialist. And that is what I call the 5 goals of socialism. Full employment will be achieved through in the book through job guarantees based on job guarantees as Bill Mitchell explains them in his works. Full and prudent use of material resources will be achieved through the Green New Deal, that is also part of modern monetary theory in many aspects. Guarantee of these 5 essentials. Social security, I talk about how monetary sovereignty can assure that everybody has the right to allowances and benefits, and labor standards. In the case of Spain, I talk about trade unionism and how the trade unions should guarantee that the labor standards are always the best possible. So after the goals of socialism, we find modern monetary theory. I have tried to condense most of the theoretical aspects of modern monetary theory in this slide. Modern monetary theory in the book is shown as a method to achieve full employment without inflation. But of course, the question is, what do you want full employment without inflation for? That is a political question. So the economic question is the method to achieve full employment without inflation, and the goals you want to achieve with that full employment without inflation is what I call the goals of socialism. So this method to achieve full employment without inflation is divided between descriptive aspects and prescriptive aspects. In the descriptive aspect of modern monetary theory, we find the state nature of money. The state holds the monopoly of issuing financial assets in the state's unit of account. The state decides what unit of account it uses, and it issues that money of account as a monopoly. Nobody else can issue a state's money but their own state. So the money is a creation of the state. Then the second aspect is that what taxes are for is a method, or taxes is what gives value to money. So in order to understand money, and that's something that I think Randall will talk more about it, the government doesn't need to collect taxes because the money is issued by the state. The state doesn't need to collect taxes in order to spend. Public spending comes before collecting taxes, because without public spending, you cannot collect any taxes. So what are taxes for? Taxes give value to money. We use money, and we want money, and we use money because that is what we need to pay taxes. Money is what we need to pay taxes. So taxes are what give value to money and makes the money of the state to be accepted in financial transactions. Number three, the state money as a means of supplying the state. The state can acquire whatever is on sale in its own currency. Why? Because the state cannot run out of its own currency. The state can always create more money. Money takes the form of keystrokes in the central bank, so the state can never run out of money, so it can supply itself. The money can buy everything that is on sale in its own money, including, as we will see, the labor force that has not been employed in the private sector or in the permanent public sector. And number four, as in the descriptive aspects of MNT, we find the endogeneity of money. The creation of money is determined by the productive activity itself and by the need for money to finance production. Contrary to the assertion of monetarism, the central bank cannot control the money supply. It is in the economic cycle that the amount of money, the money supply, is decided. So once you go to a bank and you propose a business, it depends of the decision of the bank to give you that loan or not, what decides the money creation. So it is not a variable controlled by the central bank, like the monetarism says, but it is in function. It comes, as a variable of the own economic cycle. And then we have the prescriptive aspect of modern monetary theory, where we find monetary policy, and we say that the interest rate is fixed by the central bank, so it is not the market forces, but the central bank who decides what interest rate we have. The inflation does not respond to monetary issues, but to issues related to real resources. Every time we have hyperinflation in history, for example, Zimbabwe or Venezuela or the Weimar Republic, we always find a crisis of real resources, not monetary issue. No? So it is the crisis in the crisis of real resources what creates inflation. Inflation is not a monetary issue. And modern monetary theory also defends ZIRP, zero interest rate policy. What also Randall Wray has explained in many of his books is that we have a trilemma. That every government that issues its own money has to face a trilemma. You can decide the interest rate. You can impose capital controls, and you can decide what kind of exchange rate you want to have. From these three aspects, the exchange rate, the interest rate, and the capital controls, you can decide only two, not three. No? So from these three, you can only fix two. And the two variables that modern monetary theory defends to fix is the exchange rate to zero. We defend a zero interest rate policy and floating exchange rates, as we can find here. You know, and so the floating so we don't fix the exchange rates. We let the exchange rates to float. We just decide what the interest rate should be. And in the case of modern monetary theory, we talk about zero interest rate policy. And then, if you need to impose capital controls, you can always do that. And in the fiscal policy, we find that MMT gives top priority to the role of fiscal policy because they are the policies that work. Fiscal policies are much more reliable and much more useful than monetary policies. And we also say that more public spending is what causes a bigger production, not the other way around like monetarism says, which says you have to first produce in order to be able to spend more. Well, it's the other way around. More public spending means more production, not the other way around. So these are the main aspects, in my opinion, of modern monetary theory. That, as I say, it's a method to achieve full employment without inflation. So,
excellent.
Thank you. So the equation, Kaleki's profit equation, is a very important topic in the book because it introduces it introduces a solution to the problem of the realizations of profits, which is a problem that Karl Marx was not able to solve in the second volume of Capital. In the second volume of Capital, he uses this equation where V is the value of production, C is constant capital, B is the replacement of variable capital or wages, and S is the surplus. But in this equation, we cannot explain where do the profits come from. Marx says in Capital that the capitalists can only extract from the economic cycle the investment that they have prior put into the economic cycle. Well, if that is the case, where does the constant capital come from? And not only that, where does the investment of the capital constant come through history? We find that the expenditure and investment in technology and in machines is always growing. So where do the capitalists find the money to finance these developments when they can only extract from the economic cycle what they have put in? That is something that he cannot explain. But Kalecki solves this problem with his equation. His equation is net profits of the capitalists equal investment in fixed capital, capitalist consumption, public deficit minus worker service plus position of the trade balance. All of them have been established by Marx in Capital, but public deficit. The public deficit is something that Marx doesn't explain or doesn't introduce in Capital. And it is precisely the public deficit, the capacity of the public sector to create money and therefore make the investment bigger inside of the economy, that explains where does the money come from in order to finance the constant capital. That, as we say, it's always bigger and bigger. So with the introduction of public deficits, Kalecki solves the problem of realization of profits. And not only that, we find that in Kalecki's works, he also introduces aggregate demand, as Keynes. Keynes also introduced aggregate demand. But for Keynes, the main problem with the lack of aggregate demand was the lack of investment. But for Kalecki, the main problem with the lack of aggregate demand was the inadequate levels of consumption among the working class. So for Keynes, if you have unemployment of resources, human or material, it's because you are not investing enough, you are not spending enough. But so you have to create aggregate demand. But for Kalecki, the main problem is not the lack of investment, but the levels of consumption among the working class. That's why probably he was called the Keynes of socialism. And it's always a discussion that is still going on. Who was the first one to introduce aggregate demand? Keynes of Kalecki. They met each other, and that's an issue that is not clear. The second aspect why I also think that Kalecki is very important is because he says that the workers should have the right to produce what they wish to produce. In other words, the workers should have the possibility to decide what they like and what they don't like to produce in order to consume it, because that makes the identification of the workers with the economic system much bigger than in a system where they cannot decide what they can produce in order to consume it afterwards. So that was a problem, for example, in the socialist countries, where people didn't feel very much attached to socialism because they were not able to produce what they wanted to consume. And we found that in capitalism that identification was much bigger. So for Kalecki said that the workers should have the possibility to produce whatever they want to consume. Then we come to the case of Spain, so the last part of the book. And in the book I talk about the specific policies that Fiat Socialism would apply in Spain. And the first one, and the most important one, is monetary sovereignty. Randall Wray wrote a book called MMT Premier, Modern Money Premier, which was a handbook for sovereign monetary systems. There is no modern monetary theory without monetary sovereignty. The only rigidity that modern monetary theory imposes is monetary sovereignty. So monetary sovereignty is fundamental. If we don't have monetary sovereignty, we cannot talk about modern monetary theory. So The first part of the book, of the chapter, is called Exiting the Euro, and I explain the proposal by Warren Mosler and Pinkerton of 2015, where they explain what would be the best way for Spain to leave the euro. And they propose five steps. Warren Mosler talked about New Peseta. That is a name I don't like. I would like maybe Duro. The Duro, when I was a child, was 5 pesetas. It was a very nice coin. Or maybe the Spanish peso. Or in the book I talk about the Laborable. The Laborable is also a name that I really like. So the first one would be to tax and spend in new currency only. The second one is no deposit conversion to sustain a firm and stable currency. The third step would be full insurance for bank deposits in the new currency, a permanent 0% risk-free rate policy, and the Bank of Spain would offer a full-time transition job for anyone willing and able to work, what we call a job guarantee. In the book, I explain why these 5 measures would be enough to guarantee that Spain leaves the Eurozone and regains monetary sovereignty in the best possible way. So the conclusions of the book could be summarized maybe in 5 points. The first one is that the fundamental question of communism or socialism is not who owns the means of production, but who has access to what sort of things and under what conditions. That is exactly the definition of communism that David Graeber gives in his book Debt. And that is also what Fiat Socialism defends. So the second conclusion would be from each according to their abilities to each according to their needs, which is a sentence, of course, by Karl Marx in the critique of the program, of the Gotha program. And this is the kind of Marx that that Fiat Socialism defends. A Karl Marx who is away from the historic law of Hegel, but who focus in the real necessities and in the real issues of the working class. The third conclusion would be that the goals of socialism serve as a reference and a starting point, not as an end point of a historical law. Again, we have started our analysis from the goals that we want to achieve. That is where we have to start. The goals of socialism are not the result of a historic law that define a historic process that ends up with the achievement of the goals of socialism. The goals of socialism are our starting point. And this is an idea that I extract from Austro-Marxism. Austro-Marxism was a political option that was born in Austria with persons like Hilferding, Otto Bauer, and Adler, and they also proposed this. No? The goals of socialism are our starting point, following Kant's work. So Austro-Marxism, which also created what back then was called the Second and a Half International, is what I propose, Austro-Marxism. And I also say in the fourth point that at most only one of these 2 laws can be correct, since they are mutually exclusive. We can state them as follows. Marx's law of the tendency of rate of profit to fall, which says that every economic system based on private ownership of the means of production is inevitably destined to collapse. And Mosler's law, which says that there is no financial crisis deep enough that it cannot be overcome by means of increased public spending and or a decrease in the tax burden. In the face of these 2 laws, Fiat Socialism chooses Moore's law. Moreover, the validity of Mosler's law is the reason why the law of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall is not fulfilled. So between these two laws, we choose more selection. And also another conclusion is that the size of the public and private sectors can and should be decided democratically. Allowing the private ownership of the means of production doesn't mean that the economic system is going to collapse, because we have the public spending that Kalecki explains us. So the size of the public and private sectors can and should be decided democratically. So these are the conclusions, and then I talk about my articles. Here are the articles. This is a selection of them. In the book we can find 20 articles, and we start from the most recent article and we go to the oldest article. This article was written by me many years ago, but you can already see that I was back then thinking about how to promote this idea. So the amount of modern monetary theory and fiat socialism in these articles is bigger in the first articles, and it goes down with the other articles. For example, I also put the prologue to modern money theory, the prologue I wrote for Randall's book. So in the last article of the book, which is the first article in the book, but the last one I wrote, a practical exercise for the reconstruction of the left, I condense the proposal of fiat socialism as follows. First, convert the following variables into endogenous variables of the economic cycle. Guaranteed and permanent full employment through job guarantees based on employment buffer stocks, defended by modern monetary theory and Bill Mitchell. Full and prudent use of natural resources, Green New Deal. Guarantee to every citizen of food, shelter, clothing, health services, and education. Social security in the forms of pension and subsidies. And guarantee of decent labor standards through trade unionism. And the second point is allow citizens to decide which variables should be endogenous or exogenous in the economic cycle by democratically deciding the extent of private participation in the economy. So this is more or less condensation of what I explained in the book. Thank you very much. Now it will be Randall Wray who presents his book, für Anfänger.
Okay, well, it's coming up. Thanks for the invitation. And the goal of this book was to present an intro to MMT using the fewest words possible. And it just so happened that I had a graduate student in economics, and I saw some of her drawings, and I realized that she was extremely good. And they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, and actually studies have shown that that is true. It's not just something people said. Actually, it does help communicate to have pictures. So I'm going to just give you a taste of the cartoons in the book, just hit some of the main themes from the book. And so first, we can ask the question, what is money? And most of you, and even most professional economists, if you ask a question, they will give you the functions of money. What can you do with money? Okay, well, it's pretty obvious. You can spend it. You can pay your bills. The first is called medium of exchange. The second is called means of payment. You can pay taxes with it. I highlighted that because that's very important for MMT. Most economists are not going to think of that one. You can save it, you can hoard it like Scrooge. If you're familiar with Sigmund Freud, his theory is the kind of people who hoard money are the kinds who, as babies, hoarded their poop. So that's good. Okay, so you can psychoanalyze it. And then finally, you can redeem it. I highlighted that one because that's also very important for MMT. It's a universal principle. Okay. So what is money? If we try to get behind the function, what is it really? Okay, you told me what it does. What is it really? Well, all monies are IOUs. They are all records of indebtedness. Okay, this is not obvious to most people, but if we take, this is a US dollar, okay, a paper currency, and a quarter, which is a coin. It is the currency of the United States. It is an IOU of the government. Now, technically, the paper money is an IOU of our central bank, called the Fed. The coin is an IOU of the Treasury. In the old days, though, treasuries issued paper money. Central bank issue of paper money that becomes universal comes a bit later. We didn't even have a central bank till 1913. So our treasury issued our paper money. All right, what about a check? Okay, so the check is your promise to pay. It's your IOU. But the bank is going to make the payment for you. The bank endorses your IOU and they make the payment for you. Okay? And they do that by debiting your bank account. Where did money come from? Okay, well, Keynes, this John Maynard Keynes, I think without much question, the greatest economist ever. At least, let's say, outside the Marxist world. I'll give Marx credit for being number one in the Marxist approach. He asked, where did money come from? Money's origins are lost in the mists of time. And he says, 4,000 years ago at least. And that's where the term modern money comes from. When I was writing the first book and I titled it Understanding Modern Money, it was an inside joke. It only applies to modern money, which is only the past 4,000 years. Before that, we don't know. Okay? Now, actually, Keynes got it a bit wrong. It's older than that. Okay, it's older than that. And I will talk a little bit about the history. So, anyway, if we go way back in time, we imagine they didn't have credit and they only could use precious metal coins in order to make payments. That has never been true. Most transactions always have been based on credit, as far back as you go in time. It's always been based on credit. Well, if it's all based on credit and debt, you have to have record keeping, okay? Because someone can come up and say, hey, you owe me. You say, well, prove it. Where is the written record for this? Okay? And so it turns out that the origins, if I ask you, what are the origins of money? I might as well ask you, what are the origins of writing? Okay, they are tied up together. It's actually the same question. Where did writing come from? If we go way, way, way back in time, we have an unbroken record in Mesopotamia, so it's very nice. We have a pretty unbroken record in China. We have a little bit hazier record in Mesoamerica, South America, Mexico, and so on. Okay? We have a pretty good record in Egypt. But anyway, Mesopotamia is the oldest one we know of, and it goes back 10,000 years. So we go back to 8,000 BC, and what do we find? Okay, well, we find tokens, these little tokens, and they look like something. Okay, so we can identify which one sort of looks like a horse, which one sort of looks like a chicken. Okay, they have tokens. And we found these have been created from 8,000 to 3,500 BC. This is an extremely long period of time. They used the same tokens. Okay, what were they? Well, they're clearly records of something. Exactly what, we don't know. They came up with the technological innovation of forming a clay ball, poking a hole in it, and putting the tokens inside. They have a record. If there's any dispute, what do? You break the ball and get the tokens out. Okay? So it was a record keeping and to prevent counterfeiting. Okay? Or disputes. Anyway, 3200 BC. Took them a long time, but they figured out we don't have to keep the tokens. We can just push them into clay and keep the clay as a record of the token. And the tokens are still the same. They just push them into clay, but you only need one token. 3 times makes 3 of them. Okay? So this is 2 different kinds of tokens. In 3000 BC, they said, we don't need to make the tokens at all. We just take clay and a stylus and draw on the clay. Okay, that's 3000 BC. 300 years later, they start to have writing that looks something like the clay Shubati tablets that were used in Babylonia. Okay? And those gradually develop and become more and more refined. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is it's writing, it's developed. The earliest ones, we don't know what they are, okay, tokens, but why were they doing that? We don't know, okay, we still don't know with the stylus. When we transform these into clay Shubati tablets, we actually can read the tablets, okay? And we know that the earliest ones were record keeping of credit and debt. That's what they were. Does that mean 8,000 years ago that was true? Well, it seems plausible, but to tell the truth, we don't know because we can't read those. We can read these, okay? And then finally, they started doing more than that when they developed writing to this point here in 2700 BC. They started having, for example, when someone died, they would write a little bit of a story, okay? But they had no alphabet. So the written language was completely different from spoken language, all right? It isn't until 1500 BC that they invent the alphabet, and the writing is actually like language, all right? Why is that important? It just tells you how hard that was, how many thousands of years it developed the notion. You know, I could write things that could be spoken, okay? Just like spoken language. So writing was extremely difficult to develop. There's little doubt that money was also extremely difficult to develop. It took thousands of years to develop it. So it is developing as writing is developing, and it takes a very long period of time. Okay. The book tells more of the story. And then the book that is all words, Making Money Work for Us, tells even more of the story. Okay, but let's summarize the conclusion here. So what we have are debts denominated in a money of account. They came up with the idea that we don't have to measure debts in terms of what you owe, a horse or a goat. We can measure all of those things in a money account. Now, humans develop measuring units way before they develop writing. It's pretty easy to come up with a measuring unit for length, okay? Because you have a handy foot right there. So you can get a foot, you can get an inch, you can get a cubit, okay? So length is pretty easy. Weight, pretty easy. They came up with scales, okay? They can measure things by weight. And volume, of course. You've got to carry water, you've got to carry grain. So those are easy, but it's a conceptual leap to jump to, I can measure anything in euros. That's a huge, difficult conceptual leap that must have taken many thousands of years for them to come up with that. Okay, so it's a debts denominated in money account, and then record keeping. Here's an alewife in Babylonia. Okay, keeping track. When you drink your beer, you're going to drink beer all year long, and she's going to keep track of what you owe. At the end of the year, you will pay your debt in barley grain. Okay, and she uses the mina unit of count to measure how much grain you owe. So records are kept. Okay, that's what money is all about, keeping records. They used clay tablets in Babylonia. Throughout Europe, they used wooden tally sticks. And a tally stick is hazel wood that is notched across it and then split into stock and stub. We still use those terms in English, I assume you do too. Stock and stub, ticket stub, okay? Stocks on the stock market. It comes from this. This is how kings in Europe spent. They used tally sticks. We have a term in English, raise a tally. Raise a tally means the king is telling the treasury, exchequer in Britain, to go out and cut up a lot of tally sticks, notch them, split them. So the king can spend half of the tally stick and then keep half. He's going to collect taxes at tax time, and he's going to match stock and stub. Why does he want to do that? Because you would put some more marks in the half that you had and claim it was worth more. So it's anti-counterfeiting. Many of the innovations in money have to do with fighting the counterfeiters. Okay. So anyway, this is how kings spent, not by coins. Coins were rare. Coins were too valuable. Okay? You could pay a soldier a year's worth of salary with one coin. You couldn't possibly use these to buy anything. They're too valuable. So coins were invented for a very special purpose. This is for everyday spending, tally sticks.
Until what time did they use tally sticks?
In Britain, around 1840.
1840?
1840. The exchequer, the treasury, hated tally sticks. You can imagine why. They have to go out and match them all, okay? And they were so glad in 1840 when Britain finally said, we're not going to accept tally sticks anymore. They hadn't issued them for a while, but they were still out there. And they threw them all into the fire and burned down the House of Parliament. This is true. There's a famous painting of that, okay, burning of the House of Parliament. Okay, principle of redemption. Okay, here's a debt. It's not a money debt, it's a pizza debt. So Joe's Pizzeria issues a free coupon, mails them out to the local neighborhood. You can bring in the coupon and get a free pizza. That is a debt. It's a pizza debt, not a money debt. You take the coupon in and get your free pizza. What does Joe do with the coupon? He burns it. He tosses it in the pizza oven. Okay? That's redemption. Joe is redeemed. He no longer owes a pizza. Okay? That's redemption. And redemption is older than humans. Chimpanzees understand redemption. Okay? If you help your buddy fight off somebody, okay, he owes you. And next time he's got to pay back. Then he's redeemed. Okay, so animals understand it. It's older than humans. And of course, it's a religious term, and that's on purpose because money was created in the temples. So a lot of things that have to do with money came out of the temples, and that's why we use religious terms for them. All right. Paper money. So I talked about Britain and Europe used tally sticks. Okay? And increasingly, they start to use coins. The American colonies were prohibited from coining money, okay? Because Britain wanted the Americas to send exports to them. And they wanted the Americans to have to earn the coins by sending stuff to Britain. But the American colony governments were always short of coins, all right? so that they couldn't, defend themselves from the French and the Indians. So they came up with the idea of paper money. China had used paper money for a few hundred years, but the West didn't use it. So the first example, widespread example of paper money was the colonies. All of the 13 colonies issued a paper money. So the example here is, I forgot what we have, Virginia, I think. This really is one of them. So Heskey just wrote one up. The colonies would pass a law that allowed the colonial government to issue, let's say, 10,000 Virginia pounds. We still use the unit of account, but these are not British pounds. These are only Virginia pounds. So they could print up 10,000 pounds of paper notes and spend them. At the same time, they would pass another law that imposed a new tax, and they called it redemption tax. That proves they knew what they were doing. Okay, it wasn't an accident. And they set the tax rate so that it would generate just about 10,000 pounds of revenue over a period of about 3 years. Okay, so the plan is that they're going to receive it back in tax payment. Now, why would anyone in the colony accept paper money? Because of the tax. Okay, because they had to pay the tax. And there weren't nearly enough coins to pay the tax. Some of the taxes were paid in coins, about 25%. 75% of the taxes were paid in paper money. Luckily, the colonial governments, all of them, kept very careful records. Every pound they spent and every pound they collected. Okay, a guy named Farley Grubb went through the records and found this is the way that it worked. All right, what do they do with the paper money when it comes back? They burn it, of course. That's redemption. Okay? So what do you do with tax revenue? Do you spend it? No, you burn it. You always burn your tax revenue. You never spend it. And that's still true today. Okay? Today it's keystrokes. So they debit a bank account. That's destroying money. It's the modern equivalent of burning it. So which comes first? Spending or taxing? You have to spend first before anyone can pay the tax. Nobody could pay taxes with paper money until the government had spent the paper money. It was impossible. So you have to spend first, then tax. You have to create money before you can redeem it. You can't redeem money until it's been created. All right. So this guy, that's Warren. He says taxes drive money. He said that in 1996. It came on this economist discussion group said that. My professor was Hyman Minsky, so since 1981 I had heard him say this. This is Minsky saying, the need to pay taxes means that people work to get that in which taxes are paid. So you work hard in America to get dollars so you can pay your dollar tax. Okay, so think of money as scorekeeping, and this is what my colleague Matt Forstatter is how he put it. You can run out of innings. Okay, innings, this is baseball, sorry. There are 9 innings in a game, okay? You can run out of innings after the 9th inning. That's usually the end of the game. You can run out of time. Okay, that's soccer. Baseball, you can't run out of time. It could go on for 24 hours if necessary, okay? But soccer, you run out of time. But you cannot run out of runs. So where does the scorekeeper get another run? Does he have to take it away from somebody? No. He just keystrokes it. This scorekeeper has a computer. He keystrokes it into existence. And these are 3 Fed officials, so our central bank officials, who all say the same thing. Okay, that is Beardsley Rummel, who was the president of the New York Fed right after World War II. This is Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Fed for a very long period of time. This is Bernanke, who was chairman during the global financial crisis. Beginning in 1994, the head of the Fed has to go before Congress and answer questions. okay? And so Bernanke had to go before Congress after the Fed had bailed out the global financial system. The Fed spent and lent $29 trillion. $29 trillion. Okay? And Congress, when they found out, the Fed hid it. Congress asked them how much you spent. They refused to answer. They got taken to court and lost. So they had to tell Congress, okay, what they had done. They didn't tell them, but they released all the data so that we could count it up. And at the Lead Institute we did. And it turned out to be 29 trillion. Okay? So Congress hears that, they call them in, and they ask, are you spending taxpayers' money? Well, first, it would have been impossible. the total tax revenue was about no more than 12 trillion. So it would have been impossible. But he says, no, it's not tax money. We have this new invention called a computer, and we just push the keys. Okay. Greenspan was asked about Social Security, will the government go bankrupt? He said, no, that's impossible. The government just creates the money. Okay. So even the Fed will sometimes admit that this is true. Okay, so government debt should be thought of as the government owes us. That's what government debt is. Government owes us. The government debt does not burden us. It gives us financial wealth. And it gives us the safest financial wealth in your economy. The United States gives you the safest financial wealth in the world. That's what U.S. government debt is. Safest financial asset in the world. And it has to balance our financial wealth. After we subtract out what we owe each other, the only thing left is what the government owes us. That is our net financial wealth. Okay. What is failing us is a misunderstanding, but correcting this is not just explaining, oh, the government can't run out. It's not explaining, oh, the government just spends by keystrokes. You will never win with that. Okay? Our problem is neoliberalism. The problem is that they want the government to be small. They don't want the government to do anything that helps people. Okay, it's not really that they don't understand. It's that they have a neoliberal agenda. Ronald Reagan, as our president in the 80s, used to say the government is the problem. The government is never a solution. It's only a problem. So we have to get the government off our backs. So that's their agenda. Well, like Carlos, we want to offer a different goal of the economy. And so this is the last thing. Just to summarize, what we're trying to do is to say, if we have the resources, if we have the know-how, we can always afford it. So what we have to do is to get the politicians the political will to do it. The question is never whether we can afford it. We can always afford it. And I like Springsteen, who says we take care of our own, and he defines that very broadly. We're all humans, and we all face a climate emergency, among many other pandemics. So we've had COVID-19, 21, and 23. And we are melting all the ice. And we're going to come into contact with bacteria that no animals have had to face for millions of years. Those are all comorbidities. And we have no idea what's there. So we're going to face many, many more health pandemics. And the climate pandemic. And the refugee pandemic. And the inequality pandemic. And the unemployment and homelessness pandemic. So we all have to work together to try to tackle those things. So anyway, these are two other books. This is the English version of the cartoon book, and that is the wordy version of the cartoon book. It's still relatively short and aimed at a general population. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. anyone has a question for,
Yeah.
for Randall or for me, now is the moment.
Can I ask you, Carlos, about the
Yeah.
size of the private sector issue?
You're on the light, please.
Pardon?
You're on the light, somebody,
Oh,
so we can see the answers coming.
Yeah.
So the issue of the relationship of the public and private scale between the two, you say is democratically decided, but so does it matter how much the private sector say is in healthcare or something like that? How, you know, this seems to be,
There we go.
you know, how, you know,
Well, I think that every country should decide what they want the government to do and what they want the private sector to do. The main question is that, for example, healthcare is free and universal. You want to have a national health system like in Britain, go ahead. If you want to have only a universal insurance, health insurance, like Bernie Sanders proposed in the United States, but you keep the hospitals private, well, that's up to you. The main question is that everybody should have access to top quality healthcare.
so you would still regard it as a socialist system, even if the healthcare was largely privatized?
If the people decide that they want a private health system, but it is universal and free of charge, yes.
Okay, so it would be the government giving the private sector the money to provide the service rather than
Either that or what Bernie Sanders proposed, which was keeping the hospitals private, but you have a public health insurance. So the government will pay the bill. And the government will negotiate with the health providers about prices and so on. So you will control the prices.
So you're not concerned about the size of the private sector and the public sector, that just varies?
I think that should be decided by every country democratically. Because we have all different cultures, you know. If in this culture this works better for you, well then go ahead. I mean, there are some countries where people like the government doing many things, and there are countries where they like the government doing.
So the left wing on the whole are concerned about the size of the private sector, say in healthcare. Is that a distraction?
I mean, the main question why the left or the socialist forces have identified the socialist system with the public ownership of the means of production is Karl Marx, who said that if you allow private enterprise, the system will collapse. That is what he explains in his goal of the tendency of the profit rate to fall. And that is not true. Allowing private enterprise doesn't mean that you are going to have an economic meltdown.
But isn't the private sector motivated by profit?
Of course. Of course.
Rather than providing the service. Isn't that the concern the left have about the private sector in the...
Yes. And private sector is also the private worker. I mean, the families. Yeah, we work for money. Yeah. And if you hire a company to provide a service, that company will make a profit. Yeah.
If you look at the United States, we are 25%. Government's 25%, and private is 75%. If you look at France, government is 50%, and the private is 50%. And within that range, it seems like capitalist economists seem to do okay. Okay. Now, yeah, we have problems. France has problems, but they're probably resolvable without increasing the size of the government or reducing theirs.
Well, the reputation of the US health service is appalling. You know, people say you have to pay tremendously to get health service in the US.
They do have to pay. This solves that problem. And
Yeah.
although I don't like Obamacare, it greatly expanded the number who have access. So I think our healthcare system is a mess for a variety of reasons, but the biggest one is too many people without insurance. So this will resolve that problem. But let me just add, then you have countries, say Mexico, its government is 13%. Is that enough? I think the evidence says no, it's not. So governments can be too small. So I'm not arguing against that. But it just seems like you probably could do it with 25%. Japan is like the United States. They have the best healthcare system in the world, okay? They have the best health outcomes in the world with the Japanese system, and they're about 25% too.
One of the definitions sometimes people give towards neoliberalism is that they are not concerned about the size of the private sector in the health sector. So there seems to be an overlap here. There seems to be an agreement that the size of the private sector in healthcare isn't the central concern. Is that right?
If you ask me, for example, about Spain, I mean, that's something that the United States people have to decide, the British people have to decide. I analyze the case of Spain, and I propose a fully public healthcare system. And I think that in Spain, the health system works very well when it's fully public. That is the experience. When they started privatizing it, is when it started getting worse. I think the same thing happened in Germany, by the way. But in Spain, for Spain, I'm a Spanish citizen, I vote in Spain, I propose fully public universal health system, not private. But who am I to decide for the Americans, or for the British, or for the...
I think Britain is very special because they have national, but the other countries don't. And the typical expenditure is about 8 or 9% of GDP. Okay? And you can get very good healthcare outcomes while still relying a lot on the private sector with 8 or 9% of GDP. The US is an outlier, 18% of GDP. So we managed to come up with, by far, double the size relative to GDP, and don't have better health outcomes than countries with 8. Okay, so our system is screwed up, but just looking at many other countries that have the private sector heavily involved in insurance and in delivery, the big difference between the United States and, say, Germany is that our insurance is for profit. Typically, when you allow the private sector to offer the insurance, it can't be for profit. Okay, so that is a big part of the problem. We also vastly overpay our doctors. We vastly overpay for drugs. So those are the 3 things that make ours expensive, and all 3 of those create problems of delivering health care to lower income people, because all of them are very expensive.
I also have a question. So I think that this narrative of, okay, we have to pay our taxes so we can go to the library, so we can have healthcare and so on, that's very common. So what narrative do you propose?
We pay taxes to keep our country strong. We pay taxes to keep the currency strong so that the government can serve the public interest. I don't like linking taxes to specific things that the government provides. We do that in the United States, and that is what leads to this stakeholder view that, you know, I pay the government so I should get it. You don't pay your tax. You don't pay much taxes, so you don't deserve it. that's America. That's a huge problem. That's why you'll get good schools where people have high income and pay a lot in taxes, and really bad schools in neighborhoods where people don't have high income. So we have to avoid that. Don't make any specific spending to a tax. Now, hold it, that was too broad. I think some things like, okay, you're gonna drive a car and use the highway, you're gonna pay a gasoline tax. I think that's perfectly fine, because people can choose to use public transportation. You can try to force huge trucks off the road and say, ship stuff by trains, okay? There are some cases where it makes sense to do it, link it to something.
Just a quick observation maybe. I got some problem with when you say people can choose. Who are the people? I mean, people are influenced, people are very conditioned. We got a high developed consumerism, a high developed consumer society and system, and people cannot really choose. People have become like this because of many messages and advertisements. I mean, I believe in the cultural influence, so I don't believe, that's my opinion, in people, who are the people, and each country should decide who is the country, who is the people. And then I have some doubts about private and public sectors. I do believe that some sectors should always be public. Earth system, education, and for instance water, because that's what the people need. I mean, they are essential needs. And I believe in this. So it's for me too vague to think of the people, and each country should decide, because we are not really free to decide.
But then you're negating democracy. I mean,
are our countries real democracies? I mean, this kind of capitalism has.
So what do you propose? Who's going to
destroy democracy? But I mean, we got an information system. According to which, in my opinion, you cannot speak really
I'll tell
freedom
you,
of people.
George Lakoff explains what the problem is, okay? So marketing, modern marketing started to develop from the 1920s. And it has become extremely good, extremely powerful at shaping people's opinions and shaping their behavior. And the right wing completely understands all of the principles of modern advertising. And the left wing is absolutely terrible. They don't understand it. They use all the same words that the right wing uses, and that triggers all of the right wing thoughts in everybody's minds. And the reason that the people are getting the government that they have is because the left wing has been so terrible at selling their message. So we have to do better. It's potentially a democracy, but the left-wing leadership has to do a better job.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say that in regards to fiscal policy, we can say that taxes play three roles. First of all, they give value to money, like, that's why you accept money. Second of all, it can modulate inflationary pressures by reducing the disposable income in the economy. And third, it promotes certain activities better than others. So, for example, if you make public transportation affordable, more people will use it. If you make private car using, because you don't have a tax to pay in the roads, then people will use more the car. So it is also the role of the government to promote or disencourage the different. But that is what taxes do. What they don't do is to finance public spending. What they don't do is this Robin Hood fallacy that we have to take money from the rich and we are going to spend it in the poor. and the rich pay for everything. And we have to be thankful because the rich pay a lot of taxes, so we can have hospitals. I mean, that is a loser for the left.
Yeah.
That is exactly why the left is losing all the time.
Yeah.
You know, the government can spend absolutely independently of the level of taxation. And if you try to get the money of the rich people, believe me, they are going to press a button and that money is going to be in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah.
And then you're not going to be able to spend. Of course you can spend. You can spend as much as you want in national currency, no matter what the rich people do with their money.
Well, I must admit I'm quite convinced by MMT insofar as a sovereign government, insofar as a government having financial sovereignty means afford anything that's possible within reach of the natural resources. But is there, that's my question to you, Randall, does, from that possibility, does there derive some political goals? Carlos had 5 goals of socialism. It seems to me like additional to monetary theory and MMT as the method of achieving it. But is there from economics, from your economics, does there derive any goals, or is these goals what to use it for? Always additional, it's kind of a policy. So may MMT used by the left or the right wing as well, or is there, that from economic history comes some kind of goals? That's my question.
Yeah, well, I think the details on how the government really spends, the technical details, can be used by anybody.
Can be used by anybody.
It can be used by the right wing,
Yeah.
it can be used by the left wing. So by itself, the technical details don't tell you what the policy ought to be. I think that if you understand those technical details, there are 3 policies that follow fairly directly though. So one is the floating exchange rates, because otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah.
The second is the central bank has to target interest rates, not the money supply, because they can't do that. And the third is the job guarantee, because that's what grounds the value of the currency.
So it would support today a left-wing policy, if you may call it that way.
Well, so taxes create a demand, but it doesn't tell you the currency is going to be worth anything.
Yeah.
Right? So you need some kind of buffer stock to keep the price up. What do you have to do to get €1? Well, you got to work for 6 minutes, okay, or whatever. So that will give you the value. I think all of those follow, but the way that MMT is going to win and get government to operate in the public interest has to go way beyond the technical details of how governments spend. So you have to have an end in view. So yeah, what kind of society do you want?